The major single motivation for beginning the war was to prevent that from happening. Nobody wants to see the Iranians get nuclear weapons and the ballistic missiles. That the world is better off without a nuclear-armed Iran. Once again, the United States has given a demonstration of its ability to project power, which no other country really has.
Bonjour Monsieur McKinley. Merci beaucoup d'avoir accepté cette interview pour NTD France.
Un grand plaisir.
Vous êtes un diplomate américain de carrière, ancien ambassadeur des États-Unis en Haïti et ancien directeur général de l'Organisation internationale pour l'immigration. Vous avez consacré votre parcours aux affaires internationales et à la diplomatie humanitaire. Aujourd'hui, je vous reçois pour tenter de mieux comprendre les implications de la guerre en Iran, un conflit complexe pour lequel il n'existe pas de réponse unique. Pour en saisir les dynamiques et les perspectives, vous proposez une lecture en 3 niveaux, global, régional et interne à l'Iran, alors que nous approchons du premier mois du conflit. Je vous propose qu'on commence par parler dans un premier temps des conséquences de cette guerre à l'échelle mondiale. Est-ce que vous pourriez nous expliquer un peu votre perspective? Comment cette guerre en Iran modifie les rapports de force entre les grandes puissances? How is this war in Iran reshaping the balance of power among major powers?
Well, that's a very good question, Leticia, and I think it is important to see all different aspects of this problem. It's complicated, and you won't get to the bottom of it if you just pull on one thread. You have to see them all. The global dimensions are important. You know, we live now in a multipolar world where, at least in my opinion, the main rivalry for the century is the US of A against China. And I say against advisedly because there will also be elements of cooperation. It will be itself a complicated rivalry, but it will exist. And I think that's the way both President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump see it. They see each other as the main protagonists. With Russia now sitting more closely to China than to the USA, but having some mobility to shift back and forth and affect the balance of power in important ways. So I think that's where this century will work and be decided. The Iran war has implications. I would start with nuclear non-proliferation, because I believe it is fair to say nobody wants to see the Iranians get nuclear weapons and the ballistic missiles that are used to deliver them. And in that sense, the United States, China, and Russia are more or less on the same side, although they won't enunciate that so very clearly. But they don't want to see a nuclear-armed Iran, especially under the Ayatollah regime. So I think you can say that the U.S. is doing the world's business by working to eliminate nuclear weapons. Another global dimension is fossil fuels, oil, gas, the whole petroleum issue, because that has impact all around the world. And President Trump has made very clear that he thinks the oil card is very important. That was at play in Venezuela, and it's in play with his strategy vis-a-vis Russia. He wants to develop a good relationship with Russia, and one of the factors will be helping to control and exploit the oil market. The vulnerable superpower in the oil game is China, because They have some of their own, but by no means enough, and they are forced to import large amounts. And Iran has been a significant exporter toward China. So looked at globally, you can say that China and Iran, too, have lost out on the oil revenue, whereas the United States and Russia have profited by that. And I would say you might even go so far as to say that China might take the position that if there were a regime change in Iran, that would cause the sanctions to be dropped and open up the prospects of deliveries of Iranian oil, that would suit their interests. So that's something in the back of the mind that needs to be considered, I think. And then the only further point I'd make is that once again, the United States has given a demonstration of its ability to project power, which no other country really has. Russia has a huge stock of nuclear weapons. China has a growing stock and also a growing Army, Navy, Air Force, but they don't yet have the same capacity to influence world events militarily anywhere in the world. And the Iran war goes to show that, for now at least, that is something that is on America's plus side of this balance of power equation.
Oui, vous avez beaucoup mis en avant les bénéfices pour les grandes puissances, mais est-ce qu'il n'y a pas un risque que ce type d'intervention militaire des États-Unis renforce la méfiance des pays émergents envers l'Occident et donc de ce fait renforce plutôt l'alliance sino-russe?
Yes, I think that is possible. Indeed, on the public opinion side of things, you see that already, that all around the world, in the developing countries, but also here in Europe, people are suspicious of the United States and its motives, and afraid that things are risk running out of control. So this is certainly true. I would say that the governments are perhaps a little more solidly anchored. For one thing, they have direct ties with the heads of the interested parties. They can talk directly, they can influence, and they can know. I think, looking at the Middle East, for example, the governments there are pretty much on the side of the United States and Israel in trying to weaken Iran, even abolish the current regime there. That's something they would support. In the media and in the universities and around the dining table, there's probably a rather different discussion. But as a realist, analyst, I think it's what the governments decide to do that will count for the most. And in the region, Iran has been weakened considerably. If you look back just a few years, Iran was successfully pushing its power and influence in many directions. It was beginning to deal with the Saudis. It had Russia and China more or less at its back. It had its Iraqi and Syrian and Lebanese allies who were all in a position to make a lot of trouble for Israel, of course, but also for the Sunni monarchs and authoritarian governments of the region. And all of that has been pretty much smashed, not perhaps forever, but at least for now. And so I think you have to say that in objective terms, Iran has been seriously weakened, but also diplomatically, because the Russians and the Chinese theoretically support Iran, but they haven't done a lot in this war. We hear about Russia supplying targeting information. We know that the Chinese in the past has helped with the tubes that are used to build missiles. But during the month of the war, those two superpowers have been pretty quiet. Meantime, Iran, for whatever reason, has chosen to attack the Gulf Cooperation Council states, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, Kuwait, and has, I think, at least for the time being, ended any chances of building a position for themselves vis-a-vis the Sunni monarchs and autocracies, are now all much closer to the United States and Israel. Perhaps, depending on the outcome of the war, which we don't yet know, perhaps even to the point of signing on to the Abraham Accords, which, as you know, is the master plan of Donald Trump and company and Israel, of course, too, for a stable solution to tensions and problems in the Middle East. Everybody acknowledges Israel's existence and starts to do business with Israel the way Egypt, Jordan, the Emirates, and others already have done. So we'll see. We'll see. Much is still at play, and I'm not predicting that this will happen, but I think events are moving in that direction.
Il y a quand même certains experts qui pensent que l'Iran ne représente pas une menace nucléaire, comme vous l'avez tout à l'heure mentionné. Qu'est-ce que vous répondriez à ces experts?
Well, I think there's plenty of evidence that the regime of the Ayatollahs in Iran wants to get nuclear weapons. I have visited Iran myself several times over the years and talked with officials, and there's no doubt in my mind that the ambition, the goal, hope of the Ayatollah regime is to have a nuclear weapon, which would in fact change the dynamic of the Middle East in an important way, a very important way. So I think that has been their goal, and I think for many years the United Nations system and the great powers have acknowledged that is the goal, and they've all tried milder and more peaceful ways to thwart the Ayatollahs in this objective, including the JCPOA, that was the Obama-era agreement, which does not seem to have slowed them down very much. So I do think the Iranians, the Ayatollah regime wanted the bomb and was fairly close to getting it. And I think the major single motivation for beginning the war was to prevent that from happening, to take out the enriched uranium, the facilities to enrich uranium, the ballistic missile stock, the factories that produce ballistic missiles. That was the main goal, was to make sure that Iran did not become a nuclear power. And as for, whether Iran is a threat to its neighbors or not, I do think that there's plenty of evidence that they are. They're certainly a threat to Israel. I mean, their main foreign policy goal, announced from the very beginning, was the destruction of the state of Israel. They take shots at the United States and its interests whenever they can get, and they have taken shots, including the Beirut bombing, that was a big disaster for the American position in the Middle East. So it's a regime and a nation which is capable of exercising power and willing to do so, and is a threat, as now everybody sees, to their neighbors and maybe beyond their neighbors. So I think if you look at it honestly and objectively, you have to say that the world is better off without a nuclear-armed Iran. Now, that doesn't mean you have to support the way that the U.S. and Israel are going about it, but I think you have to say that peace and stability in the world is better achieved by a balance of power among the nations, and the fewer nuclear weapon states possible. So no more new ones if it can be prevented.
Merci beaucoup pour cette réponse sur le premier niveau que vous vouliez aborder. On va maintenant passer au plan régional. J'aimerais savoir quelles conséquences vous voyez pour les équilibres au Moyen-Orient, notamment en ce qui concerne les pays du Golfe et Israël.
Well, there are different ways that you could sketch that out. I can say with pretty great certainty that the American plan is to defang Iran, and if it were possible, to replace the Ayatollah's regime with a more amenable government, and then encourage all of the Sunni Arabs, and why not the new Iran too, to join in the Abraham Accords, which is the shorthand for recognition of Israel. And don't forget, so many of those countries have already done that. Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, important countries have done it. The big ones, Turkey has done it. The big ones that haven't are Saudi Arabia and a few of the other Gulf Cooperation Council states. But the desired outcome of the war for the region would be an Abraham Accords type solution, whereby the Arab states and Iran are in a position to profit from what Israel has to offer, which is technology, education, finance, and right behind Israel, the United States, with quite a lot that it can bring to bear on the region, and always has, or mostly has, for the time since the Second World War. So that can be a stable and prosperous outcome to the war, and that is what Trump people would like to see. Whether it will happen remains to be seen. But if it were to take place and that kind of stability came to exist, there are chores that could be worked on. What to do about Gaza, for example, that's another issue, but President Trump's peace board and the reconstruction of Gaza, help for Lebanon in a post-Hezbollah scenario, the development of Syria under its new and fresh leadership. All of these are big tasks, but these are tasks which Israel and the Saudis, Israel and the GCC countries could and should work together to resolve. So that's where I think Washington would like to see things come out, but it does depend on the next steps in Iran, and we should talk about that too.
Oui, vous mettez beaucoup en avant l'idée que l'effondrement de l'arc chiite affaiblit l'Iran. Est-ce que vous craignez pas que cela crée également un vide propice à l'instabilité, au retour d'acteurs non étatiques encore plus imprévisibles?
That is a possible outcome as well, sure. Relative power vacuum is a problem in the region. If you look at Iraq, that is a semi-artificial country put together of different parts who still have not worked out coexistence and still unstable. Syria, things have changed in a big way, and the new regime is by no means settled into place. Lebanon is in serious trouble. Again, you know, the Israeli forces are in the south and are bombing the suburbs of Beirut, so the old problems have come back, and the government of Beirut has never been able really to resolve them. And then, of course, the Gaza solution is just it's a kind of a dream, but it's not a reality. So sure, you're absolutely right.
Chers téléspectateurs, chères téléspectatrices, si vous avez aimé cet extrait, je vous invite à visionner la vidéo dans son intégralité sur Époque TV en cliquant sur le lien situé dans la barre d'information sous la vidéo. Sur Époque TV, l'inscription est gratuite et vous aurez également accès à davantage de contenu premium, des articles d'analyse de l'actualité ainsi que des interviews. J'espère que cette offre enrichie vous plaira et je vous dis à bientôt sur NTD France.